Hey guys, it's Christy with Christy's Custom Creations, and as probably most of you, I have seen the black flag tumbler floating all over Facebook, TikTok, everywhere where people like to post their creations, and I absolutely love it, and I wanted to try my hand at it myself. So, of course, I recorded my journey for you so that I could hopefully help somebody create one as well. So here I have started out with a 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler that I have prepped and spray painted black with matte black spray paint. This tumbler here, it's a 20-ounce skinny from Maker's Flow, and I have a link for Maker Flow tumblers down in the bottom. I personally like to buy them by the case. I find it easier to have them on hand, so if anybody's looking to buy some tumblers, Maker's Flow is pretty much my go-to. I also buy from Stainless Steel Depot sometimes. Maker's Flow is usually my go-to, but I do really love both companies. So I have started here with, I think I've got about 10 milliliters of Swiftpoxy epoxy. I know I usually use Tumbler epoxy in my tutorials, but I wanted to use Swiftpoxy for this one because it's been a little while since I put a tutorial out, so I wanted to move a little faster than normal with this tumbler because I wanted to get one out this weekend. So I'm using Swiftpoxy, and Swiftpoxy is non-yellowing. It's a fast set epoxy, and I have just gotten really good coverage all over my tumbler here. Now that I've got good coverage, I am hitting it with my blowtorch real quick, and the flame from the blowtorch helps to pop any micro bubbles and just make sure that that epoxy lays nice and smooth. You always want your epoxy to lay nice and smooth underneath your glitter because you don't want any streaks. So what I'm using here, it is called 8 Ball. It is a black glitter from my glitter line, KCC Glitter, and 8 Ball is so incredibly pretty under epoxy. It's really hard to find a black glitter that sparkles under epoxy, and y'all, I'm not kidding you when I tell you this glitter sparkles under epoxy. This glitter has some serious sparkle. I know it looks a little bit gray in the video, and when you put it up against something black, it does have a grayish tone to it, but it is so pretty. I'm not even joking. It's got like holographic shifts to it. It is gorgeous, and it was the perfect choice for this tumbler here. So I'm just getting really good coverage with this glitter here, 8 Ball, over the entire tumbler. If you get a little heavy with your epoxy for, applying glitter the epoxy method, and you start to see like some white or some wet spots, just put some more glitter on there. It's really not a huge deal. I mean, you don't want epoxy literally dripping off of it, but if you start to see some wet spots, just hit it with some more glitter, and that glitter will help to absorb that epoxy. So the thing that I love most about Swiftpoxy is how incredibly fast it dries. So it's only been about 3 or 4 hours, and I am able to go in with my next coat of epoxy. So I'm going to put my coat of epoxy over this glitter. This is going to be my first coat over the glitter. So I have got 20 milliliters of Swiftpoxy epoxy mixed up, and I have made sure I mixed it for at least a minimum of 5 solid minutes, because if you do not mix it all the way, it's not going to cure right. So you have to make sure that you mix it really well. You want to make sure you scrape the sides, make sure you scrape off your popsicle stick and remix it in all over again. And as you can see, look at how the glitter darkens up. This black glitter darkens under the epoxy. And so you have the darkening of the black glitter under epoxy, which makes it look, more black, but you also still maintain that beautiful sparkle. And like I mentioned before, that is what I absolutely love about this glitter 8 Ball, is it's hard to find a black glitter that sparkles under epoxy, and this one still rocks it under epoxy. So once I get a nice coverage over the tumbler, I take one finger and I start at the bottom of the tumbler and I smooth up the tumbler as the tumbler spins, making sure that I have got really good coverage and that it is nice and smooth. So once I am satisfied with that, I'm going to go back in with my blowtorch again, and I'm just going to quickly torch the cup. Don't leave the torch too long in any spots because you don't want to burn up your epoxy, but just back and forth really quick, and it is so satisfying to watch those micro bubbles pop. I don't know if anybody else finds it satisfying like I do, but I love watching any kind of little micro bubbles that are trying to hang out pop. So it's now time for my next coat of epoxy. This is going to be epoxy coat number 2 over my glitter. And I'm just grabbing a glove, and I have again mixed up 20 milliliters of Tumbler epoxy. It's probably been about 3 hours or so since that first coat of epoxy over the glitter. So like I said, that's what I love about Swiftpoxy epoxy is how fast it starts to dry. And as long as you have thoroughly mixed your epoxy really well, you can go ahead and go in with another coat. As long as you're very sure that you have measured out perfectly and mixed really well, you can go in with another coat after about 3 hours or so, which is really nice, and it really helps knock out some projects really quickly. So I'm doing the same thing that you just saw me do before. I am getting just really good coverage with this coat of 20 milliliters of epoxy over this tumbler. Starting with one finger, I will go at the bottom and work my way up the tumbler to spins, just smoothing that epoxy out. And then once I do that, I will make a swipe across the bottom because you don't ever want to forget your bottom. Swipe the bottom here, make sure it's nice and smooth there, make sure you don't have any epoxy trying to blob up there because there's nothing worse than an uneven cup that wobbles on a table. So just swipe it, make sure it's nice and smooth, and then going in with the blowtorch and once again going to pop those micro bubbles that may try to hang out and make sure that it is nice and smooth. And I know I mentioned this earlier that the black glitter is called 8-Ball. It's from my glitter line, kccglitter.com. And I think KCC Glitter, I think I forgot to mention the address for it, the website. It is kccglitter.com, and I will have it linked down in the description box below. So here I went to Google and I found an image of a flag and I cut out 50 stars. So I used my Silhouette Cameo 4, I did a trace, and I traced out just the stars from a flag, from a black and white flag on Google. This part right here is trash, and I'm going to use these little bitty stars here to basically create a peekaboo look on this black glitter tumbler. So I've got my transfer tape here. I personally, I buy most of my vinyl on Amazon. I love how fast it comes in, and also my transfer tape here. It is my go-to. It's the only transfer tape that I use, and I also get that on Amazon. So I will have both of them linked down in the description box below. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to trim up close to the top of the stars. And I want to say, if y'all are making a flag tumbler, make sure that your stars are pointed the correct way. Make sure that they're pointed up. Don't put upside down stars on there on accident. And I'm going to apply these stars using the hinge method. So basically what I just did was I trimmed really close to the stars, but I didn't cut the stars. So I have a little bit of extra transfer tape hanging over the edge. So once I did this and I was like starting to get it into place, I realized, hey dummy, you forgot to sand the edge of the cup. So I always sand the top edge of the cup because nobody wants to try to drink out of a prickly cup. So I just take a piece of sandpaper. It's 220 grit sandpaper, and it's got a sticky adhesive back to it. I get that on Amazon as well. That will be linked below. But I have so much more control using the sticky back paper, so I love it. So I just go in and sand around the edge. This glitter laid like really super smooth, so that was literally the only place that I needed to sand on this tumbler. So once I got done sanding it, I took it to the bathroom. I washed it down with Dawn dish soap really quick, and it is now finally ready for the stars to be put on. So I'm just going to put them on with the hinge method. I'm going to lay it down, and over there by my hand that's got the watch on it, I lay it down and make sure it's nice and smooth, and then I am going to pull this part up, pull the backing off of it, and I'm basically just going to lay it down. And as you can see, this is why we call it the hinge method. You kind of just hinge off of where we had it laid down initially. So now I've got my squeegee. My squeegee has a little bit of felt on the end, and I love it because it really helps get in there and push down that vinyl, and it doesn't scratch my vinyl or anything either. Also purchased on Amazon, and we'll have that linked below as well. So now that I've got my stars nice and attached to my cup because I have smoothed them down nicely, I am peeling off my transfer tape here, and it is going to be time to go in with our lines, our tape lines. So y'all, I was not sure how I was going to do this. I literally, prior to this little recording here, I probably taped and untaped this cup like 3 or 4 times because I wasn't sure. And the way that I started this out, I wanted to make sure that my lines were straight. So right here where the flag starts and where the flag ends, I wanted to have a nice straight line. And I didn't want my flag to continue around on itself. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I wanted a starting point and a stopping point to the flag. So you'll see later on in the video, I do create a little bit of a gap. So that was my thinking here. So I wanted the top of my flag to be a solid black line. So I'm just taking my tape, and my tape here, it's about 3/4 inch wide. So it's about 3/4 inch tape. And I took basically this tape and I created a guide up top so that my tape would stay evenly spaced throughout the whole thing. And I've got a little bitty craft knife, and I just made a really easy little thin line right here just to get that little bit of overlapping off. And I didn't cut deep enough, so I had to recut it. So that's basically what I did. And then I'm going to take these little guides, I'll pull them up, and I'll use them for the next line. So you want to skip a line because you want one line glittery, one line black, one line glittery, one line black. So I'm going to do that the whole way down the tumbler here. And it just, by using the same size tape as a guide, it helped me to keep my lines nice and even. Now, down here where I reached the edge of the stars, it wasn't exactly even, so I did kind of try to space it out just slightly so that it did look a little bit more even. But it ended up working out. So I'm kind of trying to decide what I'm going to do there. I'm like, oh no. So it wasn't a big deal. I just spaced it out, kind of split the space fairly evenly. I just eyeballed it and I laid my tape down, and it worked out really well. And you can go with whatever size tape. I just found, I've got so much tape at my house, but I went through a few different size tapes, and I was trying really hard to line this next one up so that I could have that break between my lines at the edge of the flag. But later on in my video, I ended up actually doing this tape line thing that worked out much better for me, and I'll explain that as I get to the edge of the video. So when you're laying these lines out, you don't have to be quite as careful, because I'll show you a little trick that I used at the end of the video to really kind of just clean up the beginning of the flag and the end of the flag. So here, as you can see, I am overlapping over my tape guides, and I'm doing that because I wanted to split that difference like we had talked about, so that I could still have that, it wasn't a noticeable gap where the tape didn't fall evenly. I hope that makes sense. So where it was overlapping, I'm just pulling that tape off, and I'm just going to lay it back down so that it lines up with the beginning of the tape line. All right, so I'm going to continue to do that exact same thing down the remainder of the cup. And excuse my big head, it is so hard to put tape on and try to make sure that it lines up nice and even without being able to look like really super closely at the cup. And in order to do that, I kind of need to like put my head down there, put my face down close, and it's hard to do that because my big head gets in the way of the video, just like this. So ignore my big head. I was just trying to make sure I could see my tape lines really well, but I used my tape guides, and as I separated each line, and I'm going to work my way around the cup again. This cup does have an ever so slight taper on it because it's a skinny cup. It's not a skinny straight cup. So there is a little bit of a slight taper, but doing the lines like this made it really easy to work with, and I really had absolutely zero issues with battling that taper at all. It actually just worked out really, really well. And as I work my way down the cup, I didn't pull up all of the little spacer pieces of tape right away. I ended up pulling them off right there towards the end just because I was so focused on what I was doing. I was like, yeah, I'll go back and get to them in just a minute. So for this last line here, it's actually going to overlap just so slightly around the bottom of the cup, which is no big deal. I actually end up taping off the entire bottom of the cup. So the whole bottom of the cup is nice and glittery, so it's pretty. And I just use my craft knife, cut it there, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up all these little extra pieces that are hanging out on my little spacers. And the whole thing will start to come together for you. And I will say, I really liked using a bright colored tape for this because it made it so much easier to really see what I was doing. Okay, so this is the part where I was talking about earlier, where I said that I would show you towards, later on in the video, how I really how I figured out how to get this line nice and straight. So I just took a piece of tape and I eyeballed it, and I laid it down, and I took my craft knife and then I just cut any little parts that weren't laying nice and straight. So I probably should have done this the whole time. It really would have saved me a lot of time, but I was so focused on getting those little lines straight as I was laying the tape down. In hindsight, when I create more, I will do it this way, and I won't put so much focus on making those lines super straight initially, because I'll just go back and do it at the end. So once I got that on there, or got them cut and the little pieces pulled off, I just do the other side. And if you wanted to, you could connect the stripes to the flag, but personally, I wanted like a definite start of the flag and finish of the flag. Like beginning of the flag, end of the flag. I don't know if that makes sense. I really contemplated a lot on it before I started this tumbler, because I was undecided, but the more and more I thought about it, I wanted a beginning to the flag and an end to the flag. So I did have this solid black line that runs down the tumbler here. And I personally really love how it turned out, so I feel like I made a good decision. But if you want your lines to connect, then just make your tape connect. It's really no big deal. So right here on the edge, where that gap on the very bottom piece of tape is, I just threw a little piece of tape right there on the bottom to make the line basically stop. And I'm just going to tape off the bottom here because I want my bottom to be glittery. I want it to, kind of go along with my tape lines that I already have. So I'm just going to tape it off really good, make sure you don't have any gaps where you shouldn't have any gaps. And I could have used bigger tape for this, but I didn't feel like digging out my bigger tape. So I am just trimming up the tape so that I make sure I don't have any that overlap down around my lines at all. And there you have it. This bad boy is ready to paint. So make sure you don't have any bubbles, make sure your tape is nice and smooth. And I've got my little football arm so that I can attach it to my handle, and I have got some matte black Krylon spray paint. I personally prefer Rust-Oleum. Krylon is all that my local Lowe's seems to carry. So now that I have let it completely dry, I say completely dry, it was still like a little bit, it wasn't as dry as I would have liked, but I did use 651 vinyl for the stars, and if you let that sit too long, it's a real pain trying to get it off. So I let it dry for about an hour. I could have let it dry a little bit longer, but no biggie. So I've got my little hook tool. I've got my weeding tools. I got those on Amazon also. Imagine that. And I love this tool. It's my favorite tool for weeding vinyl. But I'm grabbing my little tape pieces and I'm peeling them. And as you can see, that beautiful glitter is now showing through. That's why we call tumblers like this peekaboo tumblers, because you put the glitter down and then you basically create another pattern on top of it, and we call it a peekaboo. So I love how peekaboos turn out, and I absolutely love how this flag turned out. Unwrapping a peekaboo tumbler is one of my favorite things ever because it is so satisfying to see the glitter start to peek through. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to start picking off all of these little stars, and y'all, picking 50 of these little stars was the biggest pain in my rear end. And while I was picking these, I was like, I'm never making another one of these flag tumblers. After the fact, it really wasn't that bad, but I was being dramatic and over it, impatient at the time because I just wanted to see the finished product, but I really do love how it turned out. Now I super sped this little section here up because it took me what seemed like an eternity to to pick all 50 of these little bitty stars, but it was so worth it, and I'm probably going to make more because it seems like I posted this on my TikTok and on my Facebook and everybody seems to really love it, so I'm probably going to make some more of them. And I do want to mention, while you're picking the stars, you want to be really careful. While you're picking the stars, the lines, any part of a peekaboo tumbler, you want to be really careful because if your hand slips and you scratch the paint, you're going to have a scratch mark in your paint. So make sure and try to keep your hand really steady. I kind of try to prop my finger and the weeding tool, and I'm able to kind of control my tool a little bit better that way. So just be really careful and make sure that your hand doesn't slip. That way you don't create a big giant scratch mark down your beautiful design. And here is this beauty. Y'all, I'm obsessed. I absolutely love how cool this cup looks. So I let it dry a little bit longer because, like I said, the paint wasn't as dry as I would have liked. So I probably let it dry for at least another hour before I was ready to apply epoxy to this tumbler. I have found that if you don't let your paint completely dry, number one, it can cause issues under your epoxy. I've seen where it's cracked under the epoxy and stuff like that before, but also paint that's not dry can also cause fish eyes. And as beautiful as this cup was, I did not want to risk screwing it up with some stupid fish eyes or anything like that. So I wanted to be extra cautious and make sure my paint was completely dry. So I probably gave it a total of 2 hours before I put my last coat of epoxy on this tumbler. And for my last coat of epoxy here, I have got another 20 milliliters of Swiftpoxy epoxy mixed up. And one thing I would like to mention, I find if I have a 20-ounce cup, I mix up 20 milliliters of epoxy, whether it be Tumbler Epoxy or Swiftpoxy. If I have a 30-ounce cup, I mix up 30 milliliters of epoxy. That is the way that I have found that it works for me. It's a super easy, just fail-safe way to know how much epoxy to mix up. So I'm doing the exact same thing you've seen me do over and over again, applying epoxy. I have applied the epoxy, getting really good coverage to the cup, and once I've got good coverage, I take one finger, start at the bottom, swipe up the cup, and smooth it out. As it spins, I take my finger, swipe across the bottom, and then now my blowtorch. Blowtorch also got on Amazon, link down below, and I'm just going to make those really fast passes across the tumbler here and make sure I pop any micro bubbles and get that epoxy nice and smooth. So if you have any questions, please drop them down in the comment box below. I try my very best to get back to everybody. I do get a lot of comments and questions, y'all, so bear with me. Sometimes it takes me a little bit longer. Also, be sure to check out my Facebook group. I have got an awesome Facebook group with some absolutely wonderful members, and I also want to say a huge thank you to all of my amazing Patreon members. Y'all are rock stars. Y'all keep me going. I love all of y'all. So thank you so much for your support. If y'all like this video, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. And I hope, as always, that you have a very great day. Y'all take care. Bye.